Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, dude?
Not too much, brother. Today we are going to be chatting about the NIH coming under fire for refusing to disclose $400 million of COVID-19 vaccine royalty details. A question about are profits being prioritized over children's well-being with gender transitions becoming a booming market. The Liberals plan to continue with mass immigration, saying it's needed to fix the housing crisis. A cloud seeding catastrophe has left Dubai underwater. Canada making cars with eye monitors and kill switches. The U.S. House passing $95 billion in foreign aid bill. And lastly, Canada's 2024 federal budget mess. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind subscribing to our YouTube channel or leaving us a kind review on Spotify, wherever you are watching, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So, first off, we've got the NIH coming under fire for refusing to disclose $400 million of COVID-19 vaccine royalty details. The U.S. National Institutes of Health, or NIH, is facing scrutiny for refusing to disclose these details about a $400 million agreement related to a COVID-19 vaccine. The NIH cited legal exemptions that allowed them to withhold certain information, leading to concerns about transparency. Moderna's payment of $400 million to the NIH was part of a licensing deal for spike proteins in their COVID-19 vaccine, with additional payments tied to vaccine sales. Critics argue that such financial interests create conflicts of interest and should be made public. The NIH's secrecy extends to other royalty payments it receives, with ongoing agreements with vaccine manufacturers like BioNTech, and despite earning royalties, the government has spent over $30 billion on vaccine purchases. So should government officials be able to earn money from pharmaceutical companies?
No, I mean, obviously, absolutely not. What a huge conflict of interest. And I mean, I did a little bit of research in trying to better understand how the NIH is connected with the pharmaceutical industries. And what I found is the relationship between the government, the NIH, and the pharmaceutical industry is basically one incestuous gangbang. That's just pretty much what it is. Congress provides annual funding to the NIH, which is currently sitting around $50 billion a year. The NIH then hands 83% of this money out to universities, medical schools, and other research institutions across the United States, which, as we know, can then be funneled to other organizations outside of the United States, like we saw with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then another 11% is used for internal research. But then the NIH also does something called cooperative research agreements, where they basically split the bill with pharma companies. However, these amounts are not publicly reported. So you don't really know how that part of the relationship works, how much money is going to them, what they're being paid off for. You don't get any clarity on that whatsoever, which I find amazing considering it's a health company. You know, it's not the FBI or the CIA. From here, the NIH then essentially sells this research to pharma companies who then provide them with royalties. Basically, the governments are giving the NIH money. The NIH invests into research and then sells this research to pharma for royalties, essentially. Now, I tried to find the amount the NIH receives in royalties, but as we know from this article, of course, the NIH is somehow allowed to skirt this freedom of information request, which is odd. Like I said, I mean, when you consider what might be in the interest of national security, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, maybe there's some information you and I don't need to know for the better of the country. When it comes to the NIH, it's a National Institute of Health. You are supposed to be on our side to keep us healthy. There's nothing that you should have in your books that should not be open to the public. So to me, that just literally makes no sense. I mean, it basically tells you they're just up to no good, right? Anyhow, the best I could find was a percentage from 1999, which suggests that annual royalties are equal to 17% of the NIH budget. Now, I'm going to make a bit of a leap here, but given the massive years that Big Pharma just had, and that we know the NIH received royalties for the mRNA vaccines, I honestly believe it's probably safe to assume they received something around 25% of their budget in royalties, just because this one alone is $400 million. Plus, we know there was something tied to the sales volume, right? So I'm going to go with 25%. So in dollar figures, it looks like the NIH probably received about $12.5 billion in royalties. So to wrap this up, I mean, the government gives the NIH your tax dollars to then fund research. They sell the valuable outcomes for royalties to Big Pharma. Then they collect and keep all the money. So I'm not sure how the public is not, up in arms about all this and trying to break this system down.
Yeah, well, we even saw too how corrupt it is when early on in the pandemic, once they had their quote unquote savior drug for it all, they started there was a reporter that asked Bill Gates whether they would share that information and how to create that product with other foreign countries like India and such, who had the production capabilities for these to make these vaccines. But yet, of course, obviously it was, no, we need to make sure that the companies who have put their hard-earned money into developing these things are able to recoup those costs and blah, blah, blah. But then, fail to mention that there's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of taxpayer money that goes into funding the research that these companies then profit off of. And then one thing that RFK pointed out in his book as well, which is just insane, is under Dr. Fauci's leadership, the allergic, autoimmune, and chronic illnesses which Congress specifically charged NIAID to investigate and prevent have mushroomed to afflict 54% of children, up from 12.8% when he took over NIAID in 1984. So public health is getting worse and worse and worse as there's more measures being put into this. Money doesn't solve everything. It just creates these bureaucracies, which then that becomes the incentive, is just more money. And because if you go look at, say, for instance, in the education sector, a lot of that money just ends up being used for more and more administration, and it's not actually going to kids or education or whatever. And I think the same thing is happening in the medical world there.
Well, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of becoming of the mind that you get guys like Fauci that are almost there just to help it propagate, how to try to make it bigger and put more money in their pockets. Because the numbers, like you said, it went from 12% to 54 or 58%. Well, your job was to make it go down. So how can you tell me that you are not working against us? That like unequivocally, it seems that your whole job was to make this better, and all you did was, make the country and the health of the country a lot worse. So what happens is pharmaceutical profits go up. I think Fauci takes a lot of the heat. I'm sure there's a lot of other guys that are not in the spotlight that are doing something similar. But it just seems like everything along the way that pharma's doing is just to continue to increase their profits. And I say this, I know that humans are commoditized from birth, but I really feel like the pharmaceutical industry is the one that capitalizes on it the most, from the moment you're born, with vaccines to all these autoimmune diseases, all the conditions you get, all the things that sort of contribute to it. And they're there every step of the way to continue giving you medication. It just feel like their profit model is based on us being sick. So why don't they just try to make us sick? Well, this is what the evidence appears to be. That is exactly what they're doing. And I mean, how much money does it take to convince a guy to do these kinds of things? Well, just ask Fauci how much money he's got, I guess.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting too that I've pieced together about this whole pharmaceutical industrial complex is how involved the CIA is with it.
Right.
First of all, the CIA isn't supposed to operate on domestic soil, so why are they even involved in medical policies and such? And then two, for about 70 years, the CIA's only goal has been to topple governments. They've essentially been a coup d'etat organization for 70 years, and you go, okay, so why are they so heavily involved in this? Arguably one of the most unethical organizations on the planet seems to have their fingertips very involved into all of these processes, and it's so that to me is concerning on its face alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is you got to follow the money. Like, where do you see a lot of application from the CIA and FBI? It seems that you see it in the military industrial complex, and then you see it in medical. You see it in the health realm. But it's money hand over fist. It's billions and billions of dollars. It seems to me that all of this is driven by power and profit.
Yeah.
So they're going to do whatever they can to protect that flow of capital, right? So it's depressing because it comes at the cost of literally our lives. But it's unfortunate, but you really can't see it any other way, especially when you kind of break down this system between the government, the NIH, and the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the fact that they even have a system in place that allows that, for them to leverage your tax dollars, then take everything they make off of it just to create products and drugs that you probably don't even need.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, they're just making things worse. It is such a racket.
All right, moving on here to our profits being prioritized over children's well-being, with gender transitions becoming a booming market. So the gender reassignment surgery industry is experiencing explosive growth, with estimates placing the global market at $701 million in 2023 and projecting a surge to $5 billion by 2030. This growth is driven in part by rising awareness of gender transitioning quote-unquote healthcare, if it can even be called that. However, researcher Alan Castles raises concerns about about the financial motives behind this trend. He argues that pharmaceutical companies have a vested interest in promoting these treatments, leading to unnecessary medical interventions. So as we know it, money makes the world go round. Does this mean the only thing that will stop this madness is lawsuits?
Lawsuits and more scientific proof that these procedures are harmful. I think you need both, right? You need people to push back, but right now it's weird. It's so strange right now. We live in this world where anything that comes from the left that's ideological, they don't really have to base it in science. It is literally ideology, and they're like, well, then prove us wrong. And then they do these things that in this case are quite harmful until you have sufficient evidence to prove that it's wrong. So for me, it's really challenging to watch. But in the meantime, I kind of want to go through this study that sort of shows how unnecessary these procedures are. So a study that was published in the peer-reviewed journal Archives of Sexual Behavior in February of 2024 surveyed thousands of young people. I believe it was just under 3,000 people, starting at age 11, and asked them the same questions every 3 years until they turned 25. So the number of youth wishing to be the opposite sex decreased from 1 in 5 to 1 in 1,000 by the end of the study. So these numbers obviously indicate a significant drop, where if you just kind of carry over the fraction, it's 200 out of 1,000 down to 1 out of 1,000. So given these figures, I believe you could argue that only 1 out of every 200 medical interventions aimed at altering the gender of young people is for the better. I mean, this is obviously pretty wild. What's equally alarming is that the estimates place the global gender transition market at $701 million in 2023, and they're projecting a surge to $5 billion by 2030. So the mere fact that the industry is expecting to grow by 750% between now and 2030, that should be a clear indication of malice, because this growth also demands exponential growth in the number of youth that are committing to these harmful procedures. So if it were really about what's best for the kids, these gender transition zealots would not only be paying attention to this data, they would also see the clear financial incentives that are driving this industry. These progressives are essentially sacrificing these children at the altar to further their political agenda. And now what you've got, I think it's 6 countries in Europe that have now banned these things. And now France is actually considering jailing doctors for several years for prescribing puberty blockers. Yet in Canada and America, I guess our science is better in these countries, they are not willing to listen to these other places where they have tried and admittedly failed. So for me, it's just, you're ruining a generation of kids, and the people that are involved in this should be held accountable.
It's not even that they won't listen to what's happening in these other countries, because yeah, like you were pointing out, Europe has really parted ways with this whole idea of quote unquote treatment for gender stressed children, but they're even going further, and they're actively fighting against their findings. So it's not even like they're pretending to be blind to it and then just doing their own thing anyways. They're actively railing against it. So the CBC just posted a article which was like mind-boggling to read. This entire article, top to bottom, was, yeah, okay, we know all of these studies and this science tells us that things aren't well for these children, and that maybe this isn't the proper treatment to get them better, but we have some anecdotal stories to tell you of 1 or 2 children that we have fixed. So this is literally straight out of the article, word for word. Quote, "There actually is a lot of evidence, just not in the form of randomized clinical trials," said Dr. Jake Donaldson, a family physician in Calgary who treats transgender patients, including prescribing puberty blockers and hormone therapy in some cases. Quote, "That would be kind of like saying for a pregnant woman, since we lacked randomized clinical trials for the care of people in pregnancy, we're not going to provide care for you. It's completely unethical. Puberty blockers slow or pause the effects of hormones a young person's body produces, for example, delaying the onset of a menstrual period or physical changes like breast growth, a lowered voice, or growth of the Adam's apple. Their effects are considered reversible. When the medication stops, puberty resumes." This is in a CBC article. Everything we know about these things is the exact opposite of what they just said. So one of the things that we pointed out in the newsletter the other day when we were talking about this industry is that one of the main drugs that is used as quote unquote hormone blockers is Lupron. Well, Lupron also has a use, and it's been used this way, and this is widely available, that it has been used for the chemical castration of sex offenders in prison. They want us to turn around and pretend like it's healthcare for somebody else. Like, just because of what's going on in somebody's head isn't going to change the physical effects of the Lupron. Like, what are we doing?
For me, when you look at this too, This is why I kind of pointed out my side of things, because I know there's so much evidence saying this is the wrong thing to do, but they still say, no, it's compassionate. It's compassionate for these people because this is what they want. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, it's not even, it's actually less than 0.5% of the procedures you're doing are what people actually want. Across the board, medical, when you're looking at what's best for the kids, when you're looking at even how they feel down the road, not one of these boxes can be checked for these people, yet they continue to push it. It's just so wild. It's become such a crazy thing. Like, I'm inclined to agree with you. You know, last time you and I talked about this and you're like, nope, I'm done. I don't care anymore. I think these people need to be held accountable, and it's not do whatever you want because you're just harming other people. I'm on the same page now. This has just gotten so far out of hand, and all they're doing is harming kids. Like, for all this, like, anybody that's out there that thinks that this is one of those anti-LGBTQ things, you couldn't be further from the truth. Do whatever you want all the time. Just leave children alone.
I actually see this stuff as anti-LGB, because if you look at even the data that came out of JIDS, 80% of the males going in for transition were gay and 90% of the females were gay. It's like, you are chemically castrating gay kids that are confused about their identity. And we know this, that often kids that are same-sex attracted growing up, they will kind of play with that other gender a little bit. Their personalities change. They might be more feminine or your typical tomboy or whatever. And so, yeah, to say that they know exactly what they need for the rest of their lives. And even the original founder of JIDS in the UK, the Gender Identity Development Services, realized that only 5% of the people that he was seeing would remain, would still identify with their gender dysphoria into adulthood. And then another aspect with the detransitioners. So in a lot of these studies that they cite to, oh, look at how much success we've had with these kids that have transitioned. They feel so much happier and stuff. What they never touch on in these articles, like the CBC's, is that all of these studies are usually done on kids that are still going through the gender treatment, and these clinics are so fucking busy and they're ramping up so fast that they can't, when a child drops out of their programs, they don't follow up with them. So all of those kids just get thrown to the wayside, and they're like, well, everyone we're still seeing is happy. And you're like, yeah, but what about all those kids that dropped out? What happened there? And something with JIDS as well was that they found 70% of detransitioners said the reason that they detransitioned was because they realized that their gender dysphoria was coming from other issues. Essentially, that they were being told they had a software issue, or sorry, that they had a hardware issue when they really had a software issue. And yeah, and we're trying to change their fucking hardware.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things there that frustrate me a little bit. One of them is, do you remember when you graduated high school, you were 18 and you were trying to figure out what you wanted to do with your life? And one of the things, when I look back, I kind of go, wow, man, that's a really, really young age to try to figure that out. Because, you know, you go to college, you go to university, you drop out, you don't really know yourself. 18 is a really tough age to try to figure that out. And then I remember, because I was the first year in school where they transitioned everybody to dropping OAC. So they got rid of grade 13. And then they're like, hey, you have to sort of decide in like grade 10 or 11 whether you're going to take applied or academic, which was college or university essentially. And I remember thinking, geez, that's really tough to do when you're in grade 10, to try to figure out your life path. That is so challenging because I don't even know myself. And I had the wherewithal at that age to go, I really don't know. And I think this is crazy that they're trying to push us down this path. And that's just kind of what you're going to do for work, or what maybe education you're going to get. And it's a big part of your life, but not super significant. You can change your job whenever you want. But I remember looking back and going, this is insane that they're forcing these kids to do this. But now they're doing it even at an even younger age with their gender, with their hardware. This is something you can't take back. You can't change career paths. This is gonna fuck you up for life. And I just find it so challenging that they're putting kids through this. It's such a dark chapter. And you know, to your point about people that are detransitioning, I've seen a couple horror stories about not only that there's no treatment for these people to once they want to detransition, there's no help, there's no support, nothing there. They are ostracized to the 10th degree from their own community. They've done something wrong because this harmful surgery they were given ended up not being what they needed. And then they're the problem. So they try to snuff out these voices. It's I don't know, man. It's so crazy to watch a political ideology go so far as to, like I said, sacrifice children on the altar to maintain their narrative. This is such a wild chapter in history that is going to be looked back on with so much disdain. Ugh.
it's crazy. I actually highly recommend people go look at, there's a Daily Mail article talking about how a Texas gender clinic is now dubbed the Frankenstein lab after performing hundreds of experimental surgeries each year, including giving patients a penis and vagina and Barbie dolling clients by removing both. So
Oh my God, removing both?
Oh yeah, and dude, somebody actually just
How did the plumbing work on that situation?
It doesn't. It's yeah. And then so there also with Canada, in regards to that as well, there was actually somebody that just the National Post was covering it that got they're going to get tax funded health, quote unquote, health care to get both a penis and vagina.
Oh yeah, it's happening in Ontario.
Yeah.
That's news all over the world right now. It's so jokes.
Dude, it's like,
I'm like,
what are we doing? This is literal delusion, and it's just widespread at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that that's a taxpayer funded thing right now. I'm like, what? What's happening here, guys?
Yeah.
Like, this is, I mean, it brings a whole new meaning to they, them, I suppose. Fuck.
All right, so moving on here, we've got the Liberals plan to continue with mass immigration, saying it's needed to fix the housing crisis. The Trudeau government has recently defended its mass immigration plan of 500,000 newcomers annually, claiming it's crucial for Canada's housing affordability. This assertion comes despite a leaked memo from June 24th, 2022, directly linking part of the housing crisis to the Prime Minister's immigration policy. They argue that continued mass immigration will alleviate the housing crisis by boosting labor supply, particularly in sectors like construction and healthcare. However, a recent Ledger poll reveals a shift in public opinion, with many Canadians concerned about immigration's impact on housing and healthcare. Even the Bank of Canada deputy governor has tied the housing crisis to the government's immigration policy. Trudeau has acknowledged the housing situation, but emphasized that it's not a primary federal responsibility. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre criticizes Trudeau for the crisis, but hasn't detailed his stance on immigration numbers, focusing instead on addressing housing with existing resources. So, Jonathan, will immigration fix the housing crisis?
The notion that mass immigration solves the housing crisis is not just absurd. It will obviously exacerbate the housing shortage. So I obviously just ran a few numbers on this because, you know, I don't want to sound like a raving lunatic sometimes. So you kind of look at the figures, because it's a lot easier to be objective when you're arguing with the government and the media. You sort of have to come at them with like a reasonable amount of facts just to sort of quiet them down, because people give them a lot more credibility than people like you and I. So I did a little research on this, and according to Made in Canada, there are approximately 1.5 million people employed in the construction industry. Now, this encompasses rather self-employed employees, everything else like that, but it also includes commercial and residential. So because the majority of building in Canada is done, the majority of building that is done in Canada is residential, it's safe to assume that about 1 million people work in the residential arena. So on an annual basis, Canada completes roughly 200,000 homes. Now, obviously, they're trying to get to 250 this year, 300, whatever it is. They're aiming for around 250. That's kind of their target. But they're around 200,000 is about the average. So when you do the math, you go, okay, there's 1 million people, 200,000 homes. That means you need 5 construction workers to finish a home every year. I know that doesn't exactly explain how the construction industry works, but when you back into those figures, it's a very reasonable number to come up with. You kind of go, okay, if we scale the infrastructure by another 500,000, that should equal an extra 100,000 homes, which is to my point here. So now Statistics Canada reports that there is an average 2.5 people per household in Canada, right? So even if all 500,000 new permanent residents coming into Canada each year to work in construction, they would only contribute an additional 100,000 homes because of the 5-to-1, right? However, you know, considering the average household size, their presence alone at 2.5 people per home would necessitate the need for 200,000 homes just to accommodate them. So we're already running a deficit there, right? Now, there are some very clear flaws in my math. For example, it's unlikely that even 10% of new immigrants would work in construction. That's a lot. But even if they do, let's say that's 10%. Well, now instead of it being 100,000 homes they contribute, well, now they're only contributing 10,000, but they still need 200,000. So that means we're at a deficit now of 190,000. So someone would go, well, Jonathan, we build 250,000 homes a year this year. If we only if we only need 190,000, then we make a 60,000 home dent in it, right? So theoretically, you're moving in the right direction, except we did not include non-permanent residents. When you include non-permanent residents, which brings you to about 1.3 million people every year, well, now you need 500,000 homes a year just to keep up with immigration. 500,000 homes. We're not even going to hit half of that. So every year, this is going to continue to get worse. And what the government has said is that they will continue to let in 500,000 people a year for at least the next 3 years. That is not including non-permanent residents. This is going to make the crisis 10 times worse.
People, I can tell, are very hesitant to say anything about this topic because the minute that they say maybe is such thing as too much immigration, they're afraid of getting that racist label tossed at them, or xenophobic label, or whatever the latest phobia is that they want to stick on people. But even we just saw this week as well, recent immigrants to Canada are voicing concerns about high immigration levels and are more likely to support the Conservatives than any other party, according to a recent Ledger poll. So overall, you've got the majority of them there. The highest output is people saying that of immigrants themselves are saying there's too many immigrants.
Yep.
And again, we've seen this time and time again with there's been so many interviews that you go boots on the ground to these highly these neighborhoods that have high levels of immigration, and you ask them whether they're happy with the way that Canada is going, even outside of the immigration stuff. And it's always, oh, no, I felt like I was lied to coming here. Like, there's not overwhelming economic opportunity. I've got terrible job options to choose from. I'm pretty much coming over here working minimum wage, and the cost of living is through the freaking roof.
Yep.
So I even see that too. We know that a lot of the time, and this is a very commendable aspect of immigration, where people will immigrate to another country and then try to send funds and money back home, right? But now I can't help but to probably imagine that most of them are coming here probably with that mentality in mind, like, okay, I'm going to be able to provide for my family back home, and then get here and be like, holy shit,
God.
I'm in debt.
I need them to send me money.
Yeah,
just so I could leave this place.
Yeah, so it's the idea that more and more of this will fix the issues that it's caused is just insane. And then, to see even our politicians just completely gaslight us in this arena as well, because we saw the Calgary mayor criticizing homeownership, likening it to being stuck in the past.
Ah, yes, Jody Gondek.
Yeah, she was saying that embracing a lifetime of renting instead of owning a home can be liberating, noting increased freedom for travel and trying out different communities. Gondek, who owns 2 properties in Calgary, made these remarks during a discussion with a development company. She criticized the traditional view of homeownership, likening it to being stuck in past decades. Top-notch example of somebody with luxury beliefs, somebody that can have these beliefs that really do affect poor income or even just middle class people as well very negatively, but hey, I can have this belief because I'm so progressive.
Yeah, and I mean, beyond luxury beliefs, immigration's not just going to affect the housing crisis. It's going to affect everything in Canada and being able to afford everything, because the more people you have in here, you're going to drive up demand. So what does that do? It drives inflation. When you have more people here and you're driving up the demand for homes, obviously, what happens? Well, the prices go up. Well, how do they try to quell that? Well, they keep the interest rates high. And then you kind of go, okay, well, then the entire economy is going to be a problem if you continue to bring this many people in. You go, okay, well, what about healthcare? We just finished 10th out of 10 of like top value nations in the world in terms of primary care. It's just going to continue to get worse. So you look at across the board here, this isn't just going to exacerbate the housing crisis. Unfortunately, it's just going to make Canada worse across the board.
Yeah. And two, we've seen crime rates go through the roof. And again, this doesn't mean that every immigrant coming over by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, is a potential criminal. But even just when you look at crime statistics, what you realize is that it's roughly like 1% of the population commits 60% of the violent crimes.
Wow.
So it only needs to be a very select few amount of people to cause a major issue in crime. And then like we're seeing this, whether it be car thefts just going up massively. Again, they just get shipped back overseas. So it's very obvious that these are international organizations that are operating this.
100%.
It's not like, again, it is easy to have that mentality that, okay, well, in hard economic times, people will turn to crime, but I don't think that's the case at all, because even we just saw in the Toronto gold heist, there was a group that stole, what was it, $20 million worth of gold
bars, yeah.
And it was like, I can tell you right now, not one of those people was a native Canadian.
No.
And so, again, this isn't me saying that immigrants on large are criminals by any means. I want to make that very clear. But this very lax idea is just of we're allowing so many that we can't possibly take out that potential negative 1% of people.
Oh, I agree. And to be honest with you, to sort of further that point, when you've got very lax laws, you've got catch and release laws, you don't penalize people, you allow illegal aliens to let them pour through the border like, oh, we'll worry about it later. When you have that structure in place, people are opportunistic. So it's not just about like, hey, you're not necessarily singling out immigrants. The system itself allows for people that are predatory to go, oh, I'll just go to Canada because I can get away with it. That's a great system to be a part of, to be in the auto theft business or whatever else it is that they're going to do, because we're just basically we're condoning it with our behavior, with our systems that are in place. Yeah. So it's not even that. It's just, again, I hate to say this, but almost every system in place right now in this country is a mess.
Yeah.
Fuck. Oh, man.
And then to add on top of that, I can immigrate to the other side of the world and get a slap on the wrist if I get caught stealing, or I can steal here and I literally will lose my wrists.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about that, about the slap on the wrist, all those guys that have been charged and were arrested for the gold heist, they were all released.
What?
Every single, not one of them is being held right now. They're all out on bail. Every single one of them.
That's a joke, man. Yep. Oh, Jesus. All right. Well, moving on here before we get too angry at that. A cloud seeding catastrophe has left Dubai underwater. The recent torrential rains in the United Arab Emirates have caused significant disruptions, including flight cancellations, school closures, and traffic standstills. These heavy rains, leading to widespread flooding, have been likely attributed to cloud seeding, a practice initiated by the UAE in 2002 to address water security concerns. This technique involves introducing chemicals and tiny particles into the atmosphere to stimulate more rainfall from clouds. While this may seem beneficial for water resources, the recent downpours have caused substantial damage, promoting concerns about the effectiveness and consequences of cloud seeding. The aftermath of the heavy rains was shared on social media, highlighting the destruction caused, such as cars swept off of roads, shops with collapsed ceilings due to water inundation, and disruptions of public transportation like Dubai's metro. Residents had to deal with flooded apartments, power outages, and flooded underground car parks, while roads in Abu Dhabi also experienced flooding. Neighboring Oman faced similar challenges, with at least 18 reported deaths due to heavy rains and flooding. These incidents raised concerns about the effectiveness and potential risks associated with cloud seeding, especially in regions prone to extreme weather events. So do you trust global governments with weather modification technologies?
Dude, I mean, the government has proven to be the most inefficient, self-serving, underperforming, unaccountable, corrupt group of highway robbers that exist to expand their grasp on power only. They assume literally no accountability, and now they're entering this God complex era in trying to control the weather. So no, I honestly can't think of a worse group of unqualified asshats to control this kind of technology. No, I mean, look, this technology is clearly not an exact science, right? If you don't think so, then just ask Dubai or the people of Oman, where people actually died, right? Cloud seeding involves introducing artificial substances such as silver iodide or potassium iodide into the clouds to stimulate precipitation. So when these things are injected, they then have to pour down into the earth, which they know affects soil and water quality, which obviously leads to some sort of ecological imbalance. We don't know how much. I don't know how much it is. But the other thing too, when you alter precipitation, it also ruins sort of the natural process of how the rest of the world is supposed to operate. I know that sounds a little crazy, but if you're stealing rain from your neighbor, well, now things don't, you change the ecological imbalance, it doesn't just stay in your area, right? I was talking to my dad about it, and I go, hey, look, if you can make it rain on your land and not someone else's, then theoretically you could cause a drought somewhere else, right? And he goes, why wouldn't you just use it as a form of warfare on their community or their economy or their society, like what happened in Dubai, because you completely immobilize them? So, I mean, look, super dangerous technology. Government should not be controlling it. No one should be playing God.
Yeah, well, we've even seen this technology used in warfare before, right? With Operation Popeye, which was a military cloud seeding project carried out by the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War in 1967 to 1972. Their whole goal was essentially to cause torrential rains over areas that were pivotal for the guerrilla fighters in Vietnam to transport to military equipment and such. And yeah, so again, as far back as the 70s, this has already been used for malicious purposes. And then my biggest issue with this topic in particular is how anybody who noted these things were happening or that spraying was happening in the skies with these chemicals and such, for decades, you would be called a crazy person.
Tinfoil hat.
Yeah,
for sure.
For even just,
yeah.
Even just, and again, actually, I noticed somebody on, we had made a video talking about cloud seeding earlier this week in Dubai and posted it on Instagram there. And I actually just realized today there was a comment of somebody just saying cloud seeding isn't even real. And it was like a well-known account too. But then I just scratched my head and go like, holy shit, this is gaslighting, because almost every government on the planet, including China, the UAE, America, San Francisco just did it. Canada's been doing it. They all admit to cloud seeding.
Oh yeah, China was cheering about it when they did it for the Olympics.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
And so first you get gaslit by some people saying that's not even happening, you're crazy. But then also on the other end, I can't wrap my head around, and it almost makes you feel crazy when, let's say for years you say something is happening, people say it's not happening, and then once it's undoubtedly happening, they just go, yeah, it's happening, but here's why it's a good thing. And now you're crazy for questioning why cloud seeding being bad. And you're just like, wait, can we just discuss the fact that you told me this wasn't happening for a very long time? That's the issue. But you've already now gone to arguing in favor of it when you were denying its existence. What are we doing?
I think it's so bizarre that people don't just live with objective truth and objective reality. Like, I don't do things like that because I think it's insane. I don't have an identity with things like that. I'm like, well, this has got to be true, and this I'm going to make sure it's true, and okay, then this is the right thing. It's good. Like, what are you doing? What part of you needs that? What part of you is like, so against someone else having their own ideas, and then you know what I mean? It's such a weird thing. I guess it's the same as political ideology. Like, it's such a weird, I'm just so blown away at how many people are so fixated on the identity versus the truth across the board. It just kind of shakes me a little bit. But one thing I actually wanted to point out, which I thought was interesting, because you were talking about Canada using cloud seeding, right, to avoid the hailstorms in Alberta, I think it was. We just had the worst year on record for wildfires. Now, if you ask Alberta, they say 67% were man-made. That's their assumption. But if we cloud seed and we had all these fires that were out of control, we couldn't do anything about it. Why wouldn't they cloud seed at that point in time to try to get the fires under control?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they? The reason I said, so what I'm kind of getting at is, if we know we already do it and we can't control the volume of it, but we know we have this weapon, well, I actually can't think of a better time to use it than when half the fucking country's on fire. Can't think of a better time. But they don't. So you got to ask yourself, if they have the technology, why didn't they do it? Did they want, and this sounds conspiratorial, sorry, did they want the wildfires to continue? Did they want that to keep happening so that they continue pushing their political agenda? Mm-hmm. I know it sounds a bit nuts, and I don't have any proof tying it together, but when you consider it, it seems like the only logical answer. And I could be wrong. Maybe I'm crazy, but it just seems that way to you, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, that whole narrative, I can't trust anything that's coming out of their mouths. And I'm not saying I'm sitting here with a clear picture on what's happening there, but yeah, you even see Trudeau go on interviews all the time talking about how you don't need to even consider whether how bad climate change really is because our country is on fire. So it very much becomes a propaganda talking point into scaring people into all of these extreme policies that they want to put in place in order to quote unquote deal with climate change. But here's a good issue with this as well. When you want to fix something, let's say we're both familiar on the fitness world kind of stuff, you don't all of a sudden tell people to make 20, 30 different changes at once. No. Because it's impossible to track then what's working and what's not. And that's exactly what we're doing here, where we're on one hand saying we need to, citizens can't drive cars and eat red meat anymore and this kind of stuff, but then also we're going to be spraying shit in the skies and we need to limit these industries from having any. We're doing way too many things to know what is going to have an effect or not. And even if you do get an effect one way or another, how do you know which one of your policies is causing it? It's utter mayhem.
No, I completely agree with you, actually. It's actually a good way of looking at it. They're casting a wide net and just being like, well, it's for the greater good. It's like, well, actually, a lot of it's not working out very well for us. One thing I actually want to just point out to follow up on my wildfire theory, apparently, The Fraser Institute just published a report a couple days ago that actually noted that extreme weather events, including wildfires, are actually on a downward trend. And they even said, like, even if you just take 2023 as an anomaly, overall, we're on a downward trend. Things are actually getting better, even though our governments are claiming that they're getting worse due to climate change. So I just thought that was an interesting point, but it also does sort of further support my idea that, hey, maybe they did know, and hey, maybe they did want this happening. I just felt like I needed more support. 'Cause it sounds a little crazy.
No, well, even if you go look at the Canadian government's own data, it shows that wildfires have been in a decline for decades. But the thing is that they show that it's in a decline in number of instances, but the burned area is still more. But again, that can largely get chalked up to bad dealing of forest fires, of bad mitigation, not necessarily climate change itself. And we even saw that with the fires this year, right? As soon as they started popping off, Trudeau had to go ask America for help to send people up here. So it's very clear that we do not have the proper procedures and proper amount of people in place to deal with these sort of things.
I remember watching a video, actually. I can't speak to the validity of it, but I remember watching it when the wildfire was happening, and it was a firefighter, I believe it was out east, and they were basically saying, we want to go do this, but we're being told we can't go.
Yeah.
We're literally being told not to go address the fire. Like, let it happen. And I was just like, oh, that's so wild. I remember when that came out, because I was like, hey man, that's such a weird thing to witness, because there was not enough evidence at that point in time to really consider anything of it. But now when you kind of piece all these things together, it adds more to my theory.
All right, so moving on to the next story of the day here, we've got Canada is making cars with eye monitors and kill switches. A Canadian company, Magna International, has developed advanced technology to prevent drunk driving, as showcased at the 2024 Consumer Electronics Show. This technology includes a camera that constantly monitors a driver's eye and head movements for signs of intoxication or drowsiness, along with infrared sensors to analyze breath for alcohol levels. If the system detects that the driver is over the legal limit, it can automatically shut down the car. While this technology aims to enhance safety on the roads, concerns arise regarding its potential misuse or errors, as well as the possibility of false positives leading to unwarranted vehicle shutdowns. Despite these concerns, countries like the US have already mandated the inclusion of this technology in all new vehicles, effective in 2026 under the Biden administration's infrastructure bill. Similarly, in Canada, discussions are underway with organizations like MAD Canada urging the government to pass a law requiring all vehicles to have such monitoring technology and kill switches installed, indicating that this technology could become a standard requirement in the near future. So, do the potential benefits of reducing drunk driving outweigh the costs of severe infringements on individual autonomy?
No. 0% chance. I mean, so this is what the government does, right? They do one of two things. They kind of usher in technology that they either say fixes a problem, and all you have to do is give up a little personal freedom, maybe some autonomy, a little privacy, and then the world will be a better place. Or what they do is they try to implement policy, which if you don't support, then you're a bigot, even if it's, means mutilating children in the name of progressive gender ideology. No, this is, of course, about drinking and driving. So here's the concern you have. What about circumventing it? I don't know, say wearing a pair of sunglasses? How's it going to see what your eyes are doing? No chance. Can't tell you can't wear sunglasses anymore, so that's not going to work. And then what about when they get it wrong, right? So I've got a newborn coming into the world. I'm going to be very tired. My wife's going to be tired. What if one of us is driving? It's like, well, you're drunk. I'm going to pull you over on the side of the road. What if it's a medical emergency? Well, I have my baby in the car. I'm exhausted. You're pulling my car over? Now how's that going to work out? It's actually utterly insane when you think about how this could possibly go, like how this will go wrong. It's fucking nuts, right? And then you've kind of got the biggest problem by a landslide is who's the ultimate dictator over your ability to drive, right? Because if it's a corporation, they will not get approval without government intervention. It just won't happen, right? So when you think about that, you're like, well, what happens when Trudeau and his group of unqualified goofballs that change their positions every 6 months, you don't even really know who's in charge, decide that it's time for a climate lockdown, and then you don't get to drive? Look, I mean, there's no positive here. It won't solve drinking and driving. It will give our government ultimate power to literally stop us dead in our tracks. It's a big no.
Yeah. There was a video I saw years ago, which from the 1980s, and there's no way that you can help but to just laugh when you hear these people talking. And at first you are kind of like, all right, that's a little ridiculous. I mean, I'm prone to saying, hey, this is communism or Marxism, but even when I first saw this video, I was like, all right, that's a little far-fetched. But here, I'll play it for you quick.
Any attempt to restrict drinking and driving here is viewed by some as downright undemocratic.
It's kind of getting communist when a fella can't put in a hard day's work, put in 11, 12 hours a day, and then get in your truck and at least drink 1 or 2 beers.
They're making it laws where you can't drink when you want to. You have to wear a seatbelt when you're driving. And pretty soon we're going to be a communist country.
Nice.
Pretty soon we're going to be a communist country. But
yeah,
then you look at...
I'm there with them, right there.
Well, you look at it there and you go, okay, well, you're just telling me I can't drive drunk. Yes, that's obviously something that we should not be doing. We should not be driving drunk. But then you take this to the furthest point possible and you go, wow, okay, we really are getting to that point where the government would have total control over whether your car can even start or whether you can continue driving or whatever. Hannah Ardent's one of the preeminent thinkers when it comes to totalitarianism, she defined it as the dissolving between private and public life, that essentially there is no such thing as private life anymore, is when that's what totalitarianism is. And this is what this looks like.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about having something in your vehicle that is constantly monitoring your eyes, your breathing patterns, a couple of other things, I think it was, there's some infrared sensors and can shut down your vehicle. Well, what that means is basically they're recording you at all times.
Yeah.
So like you and I say some pretty like, you and I talk about a lot of things that would get a lot of people in trouble. Now, a lot of it we say on camera. Some of the more insane shit we don't say on camera. Maybe we say it in the car when we're on a call together. What does that do to people like that? You know, and then what's next? It's like, well, you know, you're looking at this social credit system. You're looking at a lot of these things kind of piling together. If they can control what's happening inside your car, that's a pretty dangerous one. And then the next one is like, oh, then you can't speed or they'll just shut your car down. Or, well, you know, have these, this gets out of control very quickly. Mm-hmm. And again, they're ushering it in under one of these two ways where they're saying, well, just let us put in this technology. It's going to be for the better. Look, just stop drinking and driving, I suppose. I don't know. Increase your police force. I don't know what to tell you. Do not give up this control.
Yeah.
Do not give up this individual freedom. It is not worth it.
Yeah, it's that old Benjamin Franklin thought, right? Anybody that's willing to give up essential liberty in the name of temporary safety deserves neither safety nor freedom. All right, so moving on here, we've got the U.S. House passes $95 billion of foreign aid bill. So the House of Representatives has passed legislation that would give $95 billion in financial assistance to U.S. partners in Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel. Additionally, the bill contains a measure forcing the Chinese divestment of TikTok. The aid bill for Ukraine includes $60.84 billion with significant portions allocated for defense services, renewing articles, and purchasing U.S. weapons. Similarly, the Israel bill designates $26.3 billion, particularly for missile defense systems like the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Iron Beam, amidst ongoing conflicts with groups like Hamas. And another bill provides $3.9 billion in direct military aid to Taiwan and other regional allies in response to increased Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. Additionally, there's a measure to ban TikTok unless its parent company, ByteDance, divests due to national security concerns, alongside provisions allowing frozen Russian assets to be seized and directed to support Ukraine. So how much longer can the U.S. taxpayers afford to fund these wars?
I think the U.S. is in a tough position here. You know, you and I don't endorse funding conflicts. We don't. You and I aren't really down for it. But if you think about the predicament they're in, what I try to do in this position right now is I try to understand why they're doing it or what they're doing or what the intention would be, because I don't really support it. But if you think about something, it's kind of like, well, if you're halfway through the forest, what are you going to do? There was a lot of opportunities for the Russia-Ukraine war not to happen. Several off-ramps, you know, and it looks like, based on the stuff that's come out, it looks like the UK had a hand in making sure that it continued forward. I'm sure the US did too. But at this point, there is no easy way out, right? Like, Russia is beating Ukraine, and it has become a proxy war with the West. So I know it's crazy, but you can't really lose. So I can understand them having to provide funding, or I can understand the perspective in providing funding to try to increase Ukraine's position within the war to then negotiate from a better place. Do I agree with it? Not particularly, but I understand it. So that's one thing I can say, okay, they're going to give them this kind of money. This is what's going to happen. But I guess the question you have to ask now is, will it be enough? And then what's next? How far, how deep does this forest go? Should you go back the other way? I don't have that answer, but this is the way I can maybe see their position on it. Then when it comes to Israel, it's a tricky one, right? Because a lot of what they're doing right now is not being supported by the West. A lot of how they managed Rafah, there's been a lot of civilian casualties. It's not really been supported. It's, by a lot of groups in the West, and you're still seeing tons of pro-Palestinian protests, which I think, when it comes to protesting for peace, I'm cool with. I think otherwise, some of them are actually getting pretty out of hand. There was an arrest the other day. I think 108 people got arrested at, I forget which university in the States, for protesting because they basically created an encampment on campus.
Dude, I saw a crazy one just today. It was at Yale. Students were holding their arms linked, stopping Jewish students from getting onto campus. You're like, there's some very dark shit happening.
It's getting a little out of hand. And I know that's sort of a side step to what we're talking about, but it does kind of play in here because I've noticed that like Israel, no matter what, is going to get support from the West. I think there's a lot of, I think there's a long history. I think that plays a role, but also I think there's a lot of Jewish people that are deeply woven into the fabric of America and other Western countries, which I think plays a major role, right? So that being the case, despite the dissatisfaction with some of their moves, Israel's knocking on the door of a nuclear war with Iran, right? Like they're going back and forth right now. Israel bombed the embassy in Damascus. So then they retaliated. Then Iran retaliated by sending drones and missiles over Israel. Now they warned them that was coming. In my opinion, that was their version of peace. I know that sounds crazy, but if Iran didn't attack, they would have lost balance within their own country. So all of their fighting up to this point, there was never any warning. They just attack. This, they gave a long warning to Israel and the United States. So they knew it was coming. They defended it pretty well. I'm not downplaying that some people got hurt, but I think that was Iran's way of saying, hey, we have to do something, but this is the softest approach we can take. That's the way I saw it. Israel didn't take that, obviously lying down. So they've attacked again. At this point, where we are today, I do not believe Israel has taken responsibility, and I don't believe Iran has said they were going to retaliate. But if they do, Iran's promise is much bigger retaliation, both Israel and the United States. And then Russia basically said, hey, if the U.S. gets involved, we've got a much bigger conflict here. So when you look at it, you kind of go, in for a nickel, in for a dime. I mean, they kind of need to support Israel at this point because this could unravel very, very quickly. Do I support it? Again, no. But look, they're halfway through the forest. So you go, okay, I guess I can understand the perspective. And then the last one, Taiwan. Look, Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific, they're going to continue supporting them until they can do their own semiconductor and microchip production at home. They need them. 60% of the exports coming from Taiwan are semiconductors and microchips to the United States. They need it for their own infrastructure and for the scale of what they're doing right now in technology. So they are pouring billions of dollars into their own market in the United States to develop these manufacturing plants. But until they're up to par, they're just going to continue supporting Taiwan no matter what. Is it a long-term play? I don't think so, but I think this $4 billion to Taiwan is basically, let's call it a cost of doing business. So, again, I'm just going to over-contextualize this. I don't support this kind of funding going to these countries for war. But if I have to sort of give you an opinion on as to why they would be doing it and how maybe it makes sense, I guess I would use the halfway through the forest analogy to say they're in so deep, and if they don't, maybe the fallout is worse if they don't stay involved.
I think the forest analogy is a good one because I've even said before, once you're involved, once the war starts, it doesn't stop until one party is obliterated. That no wars ever really happen no wars ever really stop just because one party goes, I've had a change of mind here. It's a fight to the death essentially, or I'm going to fight you into submission. One thing that I think is interesting in regards to the Russia-Ukraine aspect is Russia already more or less has exactly what it wants, which is the rough estimate right now is that they control around roughly 20% of Ukraine land, mostly along the southern region down to Donbass. And one of their original goals was to create essentially a land bridge to Crimea so that they could have access to the Black Sea directly. Mm-hmm. So Russia has more or less what they want out of that war right now, and essentially they just have to stay in a defensive position right now and just say, hey, okay, we're going to fight you into a war of attrition.
Yeah.
This has also been a large strategy with both Soviet Union back in the 80s and also America as well, right? Is to goad world superpowers into a war to bankrupt them. The goal is never to actually defeat them in a kinetic warfare, but just to cause them economic turmoil and also to cause issues back home in terms of public support. And then in regards to Israel in Iran, so the official said Israel's intention was to allow Iran to move on without responding in kind, while signaling that Israel had developed the ability to strike Iran without entering its airspace or even setting off its air defense batteries. Israel also hoped to show that it could hit those batteries in a part of central Iran that houses several major nuclear facilities, including a uranium enrichment site at Natanz, hinting that it could have also reached those facilities if they wanted. So I think it kind of, Israel's retaliation was along the lines of, look, we need to show you that we are the bigger gun here, that we can get around your air defenses and such. And if we want to fuck you up, you won't be able to stop us. Now, I'm not saying I support all of this or anything, but I'm just looking at it from their perspective, that seems to be what they were trying to do. And again, the international community, pretty much everyone was saying, like, Israel, just fuck off. Don't do it.
Yeah,
don't
relax.
Yeah, just chill.
It's funny how you and I we just continue to over-contextualize war, so we don't seem like hawkish about it. 'Cause I'm really not, but I'm like trying to, when I do these kinds of things, sometimes I try to dive into their shoes and understand kind of what's going on. And you could argue, well, if you don't fund Ukraine, they're gonna have to broker peace. But there's so much more going on in those spaces that I don't understand enough about it. And like I said, halfway through the forest, right? But to your point about Israel, the issue that I have, or the concern that I have with that attack, is that both of their attacks were like 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, right? So it's like you poke the bear, you didn't punch the bear in the face. It's still a bear.
Yeah.
It's still a bear, right? And that's my concern is you can do these minor things to show, hey, we've got more support, or we've got better weapons, or we can do this and that. But when you think about a place like Iran specifically, it's very volatile. So is Israel. Israel's a mess right now. Very volatile communities, right? But Iran is ruled with an iron fist, right? So if there's any sense of weakness in their system, I think you have a much easier door open to revolution. So even though they're like, well, it's a minor attack and we're just showing them we've got the parts, if their community goes, hey, Ayatollah, you better do something here or we think you're a bitch. Now, it doesn't work out exactly like that, but that's an easy way to put it. If that sentiment is passed from community up to the leadership in Iran, again, they have no choice but to retaliate. And based on what they've already said, it has to be a lot more aggressive. And that's why I don't like this game they're playing of being like, well, it's just small. We're just showing them, we're the bigger guy. It's like, hey, look, man, you're really, really close to a third world war. You guys need to chill out.
I think it's important to note too that in Iran, the general sentiment among the population that I understand, I've actually got a friend that I talk to in Iran, and it's concerning because sometimes I'll message him something and he'll be like, yo, you can't say that to me here. Like they watch over the Instagram messages and stuff. But the support, like, I think Iranians typically hate their government, like the Ayatollah. Like there's very little support. So to your point, where if they are looking for essentially an opportunity for revolution, or if there is ever that, then yeah, the Iranian government has to kind of put their own people in check, right, by displays of force. I mean, that's exactly what is happening every time, say, totalitarian regimes, whether it be the Soviet Union or North Korea, whenever they do those big military displays in their homelands and in big marches and parades that they make everyone watch. That is largely it acts as like on the face of it, they make it seem like, oh, we're just trying to inspire patriotism and all this. Yeah. But it is also
look
very
how big
much
my stick is.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey.
I agree. But see, here's the thing now. Often when these things happen, there's an issue at home, whether it's an election issue or whatever it is, economy, like some sort of economic crisis. So those totalitarian regimes don't have any choice but to sort of attack their own people in a sense, right? Yeah. But in this particular case, if I'm correct, or if this is the way that it's going, they got one of two choices. They stifle dissent within their own country, or they go attack the enemy, and then they build support. Yeah. What are you going to do? I think they're going to attack the enemy. Why fight at home? You know what I mean? So you look at how this could play out. I don't know. It just has me concerned, man. I've gone through this over the last couple of years since Russia invaded Ukraine. And I've kind of gone back and forth on when this third world war is coming or when it's really going to boil over, because like you've said several times, we're kind of already in it, right? But these things, like, if one of these things kicks off, I think that you're looking at a global conflict within months.
Yeah.
and it changes the dynamic of everything, and it's concerning. You know what I mean? Like I at the end of the day, like you said, like there's that quote that you should probably say it, but it's about having old men use young guys to fight wars.
Oh, yeah.
And
it was I think that was a FDR quote where war is just old men talking and young men dying.
Exactly.
There's also another one which is like, when the rich wage war, it's the poor who die.
Yeah, and I think that's like, and more so than ever, I'm seeing this divide between elite and, like, you know, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You're seeing this rebuild across the world, even in Western nations. It's like, I feel like a peasant these days. It's hilarious. You know what I mean? But I do, in a lot of ways, in the things that they do. So when you look at this, you're like, I have no respect for the authority and the elites these days, and they're the ones making these decisions. And you know, most people have disdain for them, you know, in these other regions of the world, but now it's happening in the West, and they're the ones that are pushing us into these wars. And it's like, fuck you guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Get your shit together and stop waging war on all these young, innocent people that don't want to fight, so that you can show everybody how big your stick is.
Yeah. Well, sorry to over quote here, but I think there is a quote from Orwell that perfectly describes what you're talking about there, where he said, "The war is waged between the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or East Asia, but to keep the very structure of society intact." And that's, so it's less about the war itself, and it's more about maintaining the status quo. All right, so the last story for the day here, we've got Canada's 2024 federal budget mess. The new budget for 2024 has stirred up some serious concerns, especially with the introduction of 5 new tax increases. First, there's the FACT tax, short for fuel, alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, and vaping sales tax. Next up is the WEF tax, linked to the World Economic Forum's agenda. The government, including Chrystia Freeland, is aligning with a global minimum tax plan for multinational corporations, aiming to ensure a 15% tax payment regardless of where they operate. And the government plans to raise taxes on corporations, which will drive employers to relocate and increase costs for consumers. And finally, the budget proposes a new tax on residentially zoned vacant land, framed as a measure to address the housing affordability crisis. So this is something I've more and more coming around to, where it's like, how can we pretend Canada has a free market economy when we have higher tax rates across the board than China, a communist country, and we are only continuing to hike them, and our regulation is through the roof in almost every industry?
I think what's happening here in Canada is we're hitting a boiling point. You can't continue to tax everybody into the ground because there's nothing left for people to live. You know, like we talked about this before. What creates revolution? The odd time, it can be religious, 2 different religious sects, but, you know, usually not the case. It usually comes down to a totalitarian regime, authoritarian politics, something like that, and then an unaffordability crisis. If you can afford to eat and no one bothers you, you don't really care about the government. But when they're controlling you and everything that you do, and you don't have enough money to even feed your children, revolution. Now, I don't think we're going to go quite that route too soon, but we're going down that path. And for me, the biggest problem is the people in this country that help it thrive are the high performers, the ones that will start businesses, the corporations. That's what it is, right? So you look at this new bill, you've got a 15% tax on multinational corporations. So people are going to stop operating in Canada. That's what I would do, you know. And this is a World Economic Forum initiative, so that's going to drive people out. The next one is the capital gains. When you increase the capital gains tax by 32% from 50 to 66, that's more than 3 times higher than it is in the United States. Why would you invest anything other than maybe just having your one home here? Why would you invest anything into this country? You wouldn't. You'd ship it off 100%. It's also going to stop people from building businesses here. And this is where I can kind of come in on a personal note. For context, I've had, 15 different businesses in this country, and I've employed 500 people roughly. And for me, I don't think I will ever build another business in this country. They've made it completely unaffordable and untenable. So my point in saying that is not like, oh, look at me, pump my tires. I consider myself someone who's willing to take risks, and I have a lot of ambition, and I've been a high performer, and I put myself in that category because I've worked so hard to be there. And I'm not always there, but I when it comes to being an entrepreneur, that's my thing. I really love it. I will not build another business in this country. I'm not unique. The reason I'm saying this is because these types of policies are going to chase all of the high performers and all of the ambitious people out of this country. You are going to be swapping out everyone that is worth their salt in this country with basically new immigrants over the next 10 years. I don't know what this country is going to look like. And it's not to be xenophobic, and I have nothing against immigrants. That's not what I'm saying. But when you come here from another country with maybe just the clothes on your back or not much else, you're not going to thrive like someone who's got roots in the community, who's built several businesses and is capable at that point in time. Maybe down the road, but how long does it take you to get there? I just don't know what this country's going to look like in 10 years if they continue down this path. You're either going to have revolution or you're going to have basically a group of wet noodles folded up into some sort of form of communism.
Yeah. Well, even the Spotify CEO posted something the other day on Twitter, and it was a chart about the growth of certain sectors. And the public sector, the growth has shot up over the last 10 years. The private sector employment has moderately inclined, but small business ownership has rapidly declined in the last 10 years in Canada. And to your point, small businesses are the backbone of an economy. They are so important, but we are on a very concerning trend where, yes, it is very tough to make sense of the current tax strategies and stuff in Canada in starting a business here. Why would I? And then too, when you consider that the average Canadian pays 50% in taxes, that's just your average Canadian across sales taxes, provincial tax, federal tax, property tax, so on. But it's becoming untenable, and everything that our tax dollars go to is just getting worse and worse. And something that Thomas Sowell actually pointed out about the 1920s as well in America was they did rapidly decrease tax rates, but what ended up happening was that actually increased tax revenue because more people were willing to pay it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this break point on taxation, and when it's over 20%, people basically try to incur more expenses to cover so they can have a lower tax rate, and then it becomes a game of the rich people. That's all it is. So when you tax this much, people all they try to do is avoid them and get out of the country. It's exactly what's going to happen. There's no way. And you know what's really frustrating is you pointed out that the size of the government in the public sector has scaled substantially since Trudeau's gotten into power. I know the direct federal workforce has grown by 40%. That's the same infrastructure they've used through all the history of Canada. It grew by 40% since Trudeau got into power. It just shows you how ridiculous that is, because it's only the last 8 or 9 years. But if you want to show Canada that you care about them, reduce the size of government and reduce government spending. Don't just keep taking more money from the hardworking citizens of Canada, because you're just going to lose their support.
Yeah. It's like if you're making $1 million a year, but you spend $1.5 million, you don't have, and you're getting into rapid debt because of that, and you're going, oh my God, how can I afford all these things? You don't have an income issue. You're making $1 million a year. You have a spending issue, and that's exactly what's happening with our government.
Fuck this place.
Anything else you wanted to add today, brother?
That's it.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website, blendrnews.com. That's BLENDR news.com to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.